Welcome back to the TrailBLAZER pod. I'm your host Faye, and each week I bring you stories of Jewish women who are trailblazers. This week's trailblazer is Rahel Bayar. The New York Jewish Week labeled Rahel a warrior for those most vulnerable, and after sitting down with her, I completely understand why. Rahel is a former sex crimes and child abuse prosecutor, and now has her own consultancy firm, the Bayar Group, which works with schools, camps, youth organizations, and more on abuse and harassment prevention. Rahel does the work and has the conversations that most people do not want to do or have. Let's dive in. Rahel, welcome to the TrailBLAZER pod. It's so great to have you. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I know you're very busy. Not all my guests come from a similar background. I have like one theme, which is Jewish women, and I have women who come from very traditional backgrounds, women that come from very religious backgrounds. I grew up very Orthodox, and so I like to just find the middle ground of like Judaism. So I'm curious how faith and Judaism played a role in your childhood.
Well, I grew up, my parents are both Jewish educators. My dad's a rabbi. I grew up in a home where my parents were constantly teaching, learning, welcoming different people. And I think where values played a large part in just being raised, not because of being told certain values, but I think because when you live kind of a values-based life, it's integrated into a lot of the things that you do.
Yeah. That's so interesting. How did it shape your professional choices you made?
Yeah, I mean, I suffer from eldest daughter syndrome,
Same.
right? And I think that, and I say that jokingly, but I do think there's an element of truth to
Yes.
that in some way. I think my experience of feeling as though I'm being raised in a values-based household is that on some level, though it was never told to me and it was never an expectation at all, I think there was this development of self where I said to myself, where can I add value? And I don't believe that the career that you choose has to be about just your values. I don't think that your career is the definition of who you are. But I think for me, when I was looking to kind of do something in this world, the question that I continuously ask myself is, how can I add value? Where do I want to add value? And where does my value allow me to kind of pull from a piece of myself and also do something good in the world? And so I am positive that the way that I was raised had a lot to do with my choosing my career, but not because it was told to me to do it, but because I think it was ingrained in me that no matter what you do, whether it's career or life or just existence, there is a value add that every person has, and you have to find your own path.
Wow, that's so special. For me, I didn't have that, what you're talking about, because I didn't know how to align values with a career, right? For me, it was a whole new thing. And it took me a while to figure it out. But I think what's interesting is, just to tie it back to you, I ended up being really fascinated with criminology, and I studied criminology in undergrad, and my thesis was on serial killers, and I was in communication with a female serial killer in prison, and then I studied counterterrorism in grad school. It's not necessarily linear like you're talking about, like it wasn't like somebody told you to do this, but I find it fascinating that the things that we grow up with eventually have an impact. So thank you for sharing that. So you have taken on some really intense and important work, specifically with the Sex Crimes Bureau, and for obvious reasons I'm very interested in that. But what led you to law school, and like why choose that specifically?
The truth is, I was one of those people that used to watch like Law and Order
Yeah.
SVU and say, I never want to do that. Like
Really?
I was not someone who was directed into law
Ah.
school. It was not a piece of kind of what I expected. I went to undergrad and ended up majoring in psychology, and I really, really planned to do a PhD in psychology, and I built my entire undergrad career to
Wow.
be a really good candidate for a really good PhD program. I did everything from, the thesis and
Yeah.
the externships and the internships and working with professors. I really believed that that was my path. And when I did something that I recommend to everyone, which is after undergrad, I took some time off before applying to grad school. And as I was filling out PhD applications, I still remember on my dining room table, like this was when we filled them out on paper.
Yeah.
So I still had like stacks of applications sitting in
Wow.
front of me. I can't even remember how many they were. And I was working on my essays and I was filling things out. And I hit this point where I was looking at these applications and I was like, I don't actually know that I want to do this.
Wow.
But I planned for so long to do this. My entire resume was built
Yeah.
to essentially be, a really viable candidate for a PhD program. And I was like, I am just not sure I want to do this. And I had to take a beat and I had to take a pause. And the truth is that I was newly married at the time. And I remember having a lot of conversations with my husband about kind of what it means to change a potential career path. And I ended up having some lengthy conversations also with my father and, had some conversations also with my mother about what it means to kind of think about the future of where you want to be and what happens if you change your mind. And it was actually my dad who said to me, well, what do you want to do? And when I was describing like what I envisioned 5 or 10 years from now, he actually said to me, it kind of sounds like you should maybe go to law school. And I was
Wow.
like, no, I shouldn't. Like it was one of those
Yeah.
conversations. And the truth is that when I kind of drilled down what it was that I wanted to do, I wanted to be able to speak publicly. I wanted to be able to kind of seek justice. I wanted to be able to right certain wrongs. When I kind of
Mm.
delineated what it was that I was interested in, it was actually a very natural step to think about law school. And it was kind of like, and I don't recommend this, but I kind of applied to law school on a whim.
Hmm.
Like I I literally kind of had a few of these conversations, looked into a few programs, like registered to take the LSATs, took them 5 weeks
Oh
later. I
my
mean, really,
gosh.
like I applied on a whim. Like this was not, and it was kind of like I know I want to do things and I know that there's a vehicle to be able
Yeah.
to do it. And as I spoke to more and more people as I was applying to law schools, and I knew that I wanted to attend law school in a particular geographic area, I knew that there were a lot of different other aspects to where I was going to be able to choose a law school. And I applied and I picked the law school that made the most sense for me for a lot of reasons, and I started law school. I mean, that is
Wow.
actually what happened.
Okay, I did
So
not know any of this. I love this.
so it was a change, and I walked into law school having very little understanding of the intensity of what law
Mm.
school is, what it means to kind of recalibrate your mind, the way you think, the way you study, the way you engage. Law school doesn't teach you how to be a lawyer, it teaches you how to analyze and how to think
Mm.
like somebody who is going to need to do that no matter what type of law you practice. And I was really fortunate to meet some really phenomenal mentors in law school because I knew I didn't want to work at a firm, but I didn't know exactly where I wanted to go. In other words, I knew that I was going to be in public service
Hmm.
and that was my goal, but I wasn't really sure what that meant. And I almost called it an audition because it felt like that,
Yeah.
but I like tried out for the mock trial team in my law
Wow.
school and I made the team. And the coach of the team was a former
Mm.
prosecutor and she was just fabulous. And I spent a lot of time talking to her about what I was looking to do. And between her and a federal judge who taught a class that we were required to take called Persuasion and Advocacy, which was probably my favorite class in all of law school, I started to kind of see all the different options of where I could go. And I knew by my second year of law school that I really wanted to be a prosecutor. And I was really set on being an assistant district attorney, specifically in the Bronx. I wanted to be in New York. I wanted to be at one of the big DA's
Hmm.
offices. And from all of the research that I had done, the Bronx seemed to be the place that, I mean, there's a lot of crime everywhere, but also it was known as an office that would train you and would really throw you in. You would be doing real stuff from the very beginning. And I was very fortunate, very fortunate. And I say that with like a real emphasis. I graduated law school during a recession and people were not hiring. And I was very fortunate to get one of very few like coveted positions as an ADA coming right out of law school. And so that's kind of where I went. and it was the best.
Wow. Okay, there's so many things here. So one, I find it interesting because a lot of people that I talk to that have careers like yours, like lawyers, doctors, a lot of them knew since like childhood that they wanted to be what
Totally.
they wanted to be. But also, you're talking about themes here that comes up a lot on the podcast with women from all different walks of life, which is pivots and making choices to change. And right, it sounds though that you went through it at a very young age. So I feel like you were super brave because a lot of us go to college and we're okay, I just spent 4 years on this. How can I not pursue this? And then
Right.
10 years down the line, you're like, I'm not fulfilled. And you almost like a midlife crisis situation.
Right. 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 Right.
And most people don't go through that at 20. I don't know when you graduated college, but young 20s, right?
Yeah. Young
Yeah,
20s.
so that's a
Yeah.
really scary thing. I want to ask you specifically, like you were talking about when you were having conversations with your parents, that you were pointing out things that you were interested in, like being able to do public speaking and public service. Where did that come from? Like, how do you know what you're interested in? I feel like I'm almost 29. I've been through career pivots of my own,
Yeah.
some that were very unexpected. And
Yeah.
have a job I love. I'm doing this podcast, but I'm still, when I think 10 years ahead, I still have trouble figuring out, okay, where do I want to be? What are the things I value? And this is a personal question for me because it sounds like you had this like understanding at a really young age. So do you have personal advice? Like, how do you find that?
I think we put a lot of stock in having to know exactly where you're
Mm-hmm.
going to be. And I think we kind of all have to take a breath.
Okay.
I say this to myself all the time because, I am well into my career. I like to pretend I'm still 26, but I'm
You
really
look
not,
very young,
right?
FYI.
I appreciate that. But yeah, I am much older than that. So I like to recognize that many of us, and myself included, think about the future a lot.
Yeah.
We think about what life will look like 3 years from now and 5 years from now and 10 years from now. And it's not, that's a very good thing to do. But if it makes you freeze, if it
Mm-hmm.
makes you feel like I don't know and therefore I cannot do,
Mm-hmm.
then I think that there's a real downside to it, right? I'm an advanced planner of like epic proportions. Like I advanced plan lots of things. But I've also had to be able to say to myself, like, it's okay to take a breath
Mm-hmm.
and figure out where this road is going, right? It's okay to take a breath and think about whether I'm really okay with this or whether I'm not or whether I need a change. Change is very scary and it can be very wonderful and it can be very overwhelming. And I think that one of the things that I've seen as I look back on my career is that it is important to take the risks that feel good for you. And it is also important to take a breath. And when there are moments where you can ask yourself, like, is this what I want? It's okay to say yes, and it's okay to say no, and it's also okay to say, I'm not sure. Like, I don't know. And then kind of see what comes along or what it is that you can make come along. Listen, I am I am like a person who believes in the power of saying no and believes in the power of saying yes. And I am also a person that has found like very creative ways to kind of get to where I am. I like to call it, like in Hebrew, the phrase, and I'll translate it, is like derech aruka shehi ktsara, right? The long road that's really, the best way to explain it is the long road that ends up being the most direct road or the shortest,
Oh,
right?
interesting.
And that is something that I think about a lot because so many of us look at life as this like linear
Yeah.
line where we start here and we go here and we end here. And I look at life like this, like a big zigzag. Sometimes it takes a really long time to get somewhere, but there are so many data points on that road that probably made you who you are, that those data points are what got you to where you are.
Yeah.
So, like, it's okay to take a breath and it's okay to think about what it is that you want and where you want to go, but it's also okay to appreciate the now.
Yeah. I think that's very important advice. And I think it's one of the reasons I started this podcast is because I didn't have any of this when I was, trying to figure out my life, college and mentorship and none of that. And I wish I had somebody at 16, 17 tell me this because I had to learn it the hard way, like many of us do. And so I think it's really important for women of all ages, but specifically young women who are starting out in college, starting out in the career, to understand this because I'm still figuring this out. I'm learning how to think ahead because that's what I naturally do while also enjoying the present because I feel like I missed so many years of my life because I was just constantly 10 years ahead, right? So I think that's crucial advice. So I want to pivot a little bit, not pivot, I want to go back to your career. And I can talk to you about this for years. But something I read was a statistic that is like extremely staggering. 1 in 10 children in the US will experience sexual abuse before they turn 18.
So the statistics that we have are underreported. And when it comes to sexual abuse, mostly because statistics are based on people that they know about, right? So if you think about it, statistics on sexual abuse are based on kids or adults that come forward that acknowledge that they were sexually abused as children. So if you think about whatever data you're seeing, you have to assume that the sexual abuse statistics are
Oh
underreported.
my
That's the
gosh.
first piece. The second piece is that depending on where you're looking, whether you're looking at the CDC or you're looking at different, sexual abuse, nonprofits that do kind of data collection, whether you're looking at something like Thorn or Darkness to Light, the numbers that you'll see will be somewhere between 1 in 4 children and like 1 in 13 children. Sometimes you'll see it based on gender, right? 1 in 4 kids who identify as female versus 1 in 6 or 1 or 7, 1 out of 7 kids that identify as male. Sometimes you'll see 1 out of 13. But what we know is that range is somewhere
Wow.
between 1 out of 4, probably to 1 out of 13, and those are probably underreported statistics. So those are I hate to say it this way, but those statistics are accurate as to what we know, but the number is probably greater.
Oh my God. I have goosebumps because that's just, oh, it's a horrific number.
Yeah.
So you've been in this field for years. And I know you post a lot about this, and I really appreciate how you utilize social media, by the way, to really like share awareness. How do you think awareness and early intervention can help prevent such abuse?
I think that when it comes to anything where there is harm that's being caused, especially in the realm of sexual abuse, which is something that, you know, is done in a more secretive
Yeah.
manner, right? Can be done, whether it's in a family, whether it's a child that's being sexually abused outside of a home, but the parents know the person, right? I think that, your question is how does awareness and kind of education almost like
Yeah.
change, right? What it is that how we think about this. I mean, awareness sheds light on it, right? Awareness is our ability to engage in real conversations, not just with our kids, but also with the adults that are around our kids. Awareness is what gives a parent the ability to say, this gives me a red
Yeah.
flag, or this is someone crossing a boundary with my kid. Also, awareness and education is what can help give kids the tools to hopefully, though there's no guarantee, know that there are safe adults that they can come forward to, right? If you actually never say to a child, I want you to know that no matter what you do, no matter what is ever done to you, I'm never going to stop loving you, right? Which is a very different statement than I love you,
Right.
right? For a kid where there is something happening to them, where there is sexual abuse happening, if it's not the parent
Yeah.
that's abusing them,
Yeah.
right? On some level, when we look at statistics, we know that 91% of kids that are sexually abused are abused by someone that their
Yeah.
family knows. Right? They're not being abused by a scary stranger. They're not being kidnapped off the street. That accounts for under 10% of sexual abuse. And so, what that means is for a child to believe that their parent might know
Yeah.
or be okay with what's happening means they're definitely not coming forward, right? So, awareness of even just that fact a fact that we talked about without ever using the word like
Yeah.
pedophile or molestation or like grooming, right? We didn't use
Yeah.
any of those big words. For a parent to understand that a kid may not come forward because if the person abusing them is a friend or a family member of that parent, then that parent has the ability to engage in real conversations with their kids in a meaningful way that may actually move the needle if something does
Yeah.
happen or if there is something uncomfortable, right? So you don't learn how to swim by running into the ocean and hoping for the best. Right? You learn how to swim because there are people who can teach you, because there are lifeguards who can watch, because you understand swim safety. And I look at education and awareness about sexual abuse in a very similar way.
Whew, heavy topic.
Welcome to
It's
my life.
yeah, it's interesting because when I asked this question, I was thinking more in terms of the parents, and now that you're talking, I'm realizing how it's like a really intricate relationship between the parents and the children. Like the children have to know it's okay to come forward, and the parents have to know how to. It's chicken or egg almost.
Yeah, I look at it like this. And you've probably heard me say this on Instagram, if you followed along
Yes.
for a while, you've probably heard me say this. It is not a child's responsibility to keep themselves safe from abuse. Period. Hard stop. End of story. Like no caveat to
Yeah.
that. It is not a child's responsibility to keep themselves safe. And as parents, we understand that it is our job to keep a kid safe. And it is also our job to give tools to our children that will be helpful and that we hope will help to guide them. Right. And if you think about it, it's like, I don't expect my kid to just know how to swim. I hope that after taking
Right.
swimming lessons and being in a position where they learn it, they will then be able to do things on their own. I hope that it gives them confidence. I hope that it gives them a skill set, right? I look at abuse prevention and the relationship between parents and kids, assuming that the parent is not the abuser, right? And the parent has the best of intentions. And I look at that and I say to myself, it's my job as a parent to give my kids consistent tools
Mm.
because I hope that if something happens or if something may be happening, that they will come forward or that they will know that they can. But I don't expect them to keep themselves safe.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for explaining that. So we're talking about social media and you're using it for awareness and education. I
Yeah.
highly recommend everyone checks it out. On bigger scale, what role does social media play in shaping the public conversations around these taboo topics? And today we'll focus on the sexual abuse. I'm sure it's changed over the years, right? And I know like even now with my podcast, I haven't had social media until I started the podcast.
Yeah.
And it's about having conversations and letting people know, me specifically, it's women, that the things they're experiencing, they're not crazy. We're all
Right.
experiencing different versions of it. So, from your experience, how has it played a role specifically in this?
So before 4 years ago, I did not have an Instagram account.
Okay. Okay.
So just to be
All
mindful,
right.
like I was a prosecutor
Yeah.
for many years, right? So I was a member of law enforcement. I dealt with some very serious cases and investigations, and my goal was to never be found. Right? Like in other
Yes.
words, I
Yeah.
had no, I mean, I had a Facebook account that was like started when Facebook came out when I was in college, right? Like in
Yes.
other words, but beyond that, like I had no Instagram account. I really wasn't on social media. I had a LinkedIn account, but it wasn't something that I posted on. And about 4 years ago, when I went off on my own and really started my consultancy, I decided that I wanted to utilize social media for a greater reach.
Mm-hmm.
The way that I built my consultancy is that my work is all connected to what it is that I post on social media, but social media for me is not a vehicle for any financial incentive.
Okay.
So for me, social media is very much about the reach of each
Mm-hmm.
platform. So on Instagram, I know that I'm going to reach parents, caregivers, people who are educators, people who are thinking about the possibility of becoming parents, people who are nannies, right? Or who help in people's homes. I know that the reach of that account on social media will reach people that I will never reach when I do my keynote speeches or I'm brought into a community or a school or a university or like, a camp association. Because in order to hear me speak in those arenas, there's an entity that has to bring me in. Whereas with social media, many people who are living in many different
Yeah.
types of communities of all different religions or are not faith based can have access to really good education. And so I look at social media at the age that I am right now with like a fully developed, brain.
Yeah.
Like I'm not a teenager, I'm
Yes.
not a kid, right? That's a different question. I look at it as a vehicle for being able to reach people that might otherwise never have access to that content. And I believe that there is a tremendous power in that. And I also believe that there are a lot of adult survivors of sexual abuse who will never come forward
Yeah.
or who have come forward and have not been supported by their communities, especially within the Jewish
Yep.
community, but also within many other religious communities. And I think that social media can be used to just remind them that there are people out there who are doing this work, who do care, who do want to make sure that there's an entirely new generation of people who don't sweep things under the rug, who don't hear about an allegation and pretend that it doesn't exist. And I do think that generationally, we are probably moving the needle in some way.
Yeah.
I think that we treat sexual abuse now differently than we did. And I'm really going to date myself, but like in the 1990s, like in the olden days, right? In the 80s and the 70s and the
Yeah.
60s, right? But I think that it has the power to do a lot of good if it's utilized properly.
Yeah. I think I struggled when I first started social media again. I did have it in college and I was also going to go into law enforcement. That's what I studied. And so when I was going through all that, I deleted all my social media. I kind of had the same thing as
Yeah,
you. I was like, I don't want people to know I exist. Same thing.
right,
And then when life happened and my career pivoted, I I was like, okay, I can go back on. And it was at the same time that I was starting the podcast. So I figured why not use it as a vehicle? But I
right,
was really nervous because I remembered that when I was on it for no reason, I was just seeing all the negative stuff. And then now, as I'm talking to you and I'm talking to other women, I'm finding such positivity. It's really about also the algorithm. It kind of shows you what you keep watching, right? And I
right,
think that I'm noticing that people, it's just the world, it's a fact of life right now. They're turning to social media more than they're turning to like articles because they want to see a human face behind an account. They want to know, I'd rather go onto your Instagram and watch a video of you talking than going onto an article you wrote and read not knowing who's saying it, right? So I
right.
think it's such a powerful tool and it's just about finding the right resources. So I think the work that you're doing and the work that other women that or people that are doing that is bringing awareness is so crucial. And I think it would be a shame for us not to utilize it, right?
Yeah, no, I do. Look, I think there can be really negative things about
Absolutely.
social media. And I also think that there can be really positive things about it. And I think, for me, and I have shared this with my own family, my kids do not have
Yeah.
social media. I have shared with my own family that I started this Instagram account specifically for a particular purpose that had to do with a particular goal. I don't post personal things. I don't post pictures of my kids. I don't share deeply personal information at all. And I think that different people use social media in different ways, and that is not a knock on anybody that
Right.
uses it in a different way.
Absolutely.
But I have found that the only way that I am comfortable showing up on social media is when it is for a
Yeah.
purpose.
And that's another thing. Everyone has to figure out how it works for them and it doesn't have
Yeah,
to look the same. I also love that you
totally.
had the conversation with your children about it. Like this is
Yeah,
why I feel like parents who communicate with their children, I just think it fosters such a positivity. I'm 29, so I think the way I grew up is a little bit different than now, but parents were the parents and the children were the children. And
right.
I don't have kids, but like when I watch your account, I'm trying to figure out how would I raise my kids, right? And I
Right.
just love the concept of kind of bringing your kids along on the journey. Of course, things have to be phrased in a way where it's not
Totally.
traumatizing for them, but that's a whole different conversation.
Totally.
You mentioned your consultancy firm,
Yeah.
so can you share like what made you go on your own and what's the mission of your firm?
Sure. So, just by way of background, I left being a prosecutor back in 2016,
Okay.
and I started working at a large investigative company. They had a sexual misconduct
Interesting.
consulting and investigations division, and I ended up being a managing director there. And we conducted a lot of large scale historical abuse investigations, many of the things that you might have read about in the news. We did a lot of just investigative work in many different sectors related to sexual harassment, to grooming, to sexual abuse, to
Wow.
historical abuse, to boundary crossing behavior, etc. And a big piece of what I started to do there was, you have this entity that has been just decimated by allegations of historical
Mm.
abuse, cover-ups, etc. How do you heal, right?
Mm.
How do you move forward? How do you make sure this doesn't happen again? And so a big piece of what I loved to do there was to come in after the fact and do just community building,
Mm.
keynotes, speeches, workshops, trainings on abuse prevention,
Mm-hmm.
on grooming, on sexual abuse, on these tough topics that no one actually wants to talk
Yep.
about, that you have the ability to talk about it in a way that can actually build community around it instead of making people walk out scared. And I did a lot of that while I was there. And about 4.5 years ago, I really decided I wanted to make a shift and not do the investigative work anymore after well over a decade of doing
Wow.
investigative work. It's okay to make a change.
Yeah.
And so, with their blessing and knowledge, I went off on my own to start the Bayer Group. It's a consultancy that works with schools, camps, youth organizations, national sports organizations, many other youth serving entities, as well as many entities in the corporate sector that are not youth serving. And what we do is abuse and harassment prevention. And so that really falls into line of really kind of a few different things. I do a lot of public speaking, trainings, workshops for rooms with anywhere from like 10 people to 600
Wow.
people.
Wow.
And that can be, in the corporate sector, it's focused on anti-harassment work, like sexual harassment. And then in the child-facing sector, no matter what entity it is, it can be trainings on abuse prevention, sexual abuse, grooming, understanding boundaries, understanding consent, ethical consent. When I work with kids in like a school, it can be safe social media practices and internet safety. When I do parent workshops, like mostly at a
Yes.
school, it'll be how to talk to your kids about abuses that happen online, sextortion and sending nudes and online solicitation and trafficking and porn, right? And
Yeah.
all of these things that no one wants to
Yeah.
talk about. How do we do that? And how do we do that even if we're not a former sex crimes prosecutor? Like, how do you do that even if you have zero experience in this field? And then I also do a lot of consulting, right? A lot of consulting on policies and procedures, on best practices. There are times when I can come in as an expert witness. There are times when I come in during a crisis to advise along with their legal counsel, right? I'm an attorney, but I don't come in as legal
Mm.
counsel. So there are different ways that I can do it. And I have this kind of niche of doing this work, and I do it for the clients that I believe
Mm.
really want to do it.
Wow.
And there are times when I say no, like a lot.
Really?
Yeah, I'm not a band-aid, so I kind of take
I
the
love
approach
that.
of like, if I believe that you want to do this work
Yeah.
because you genuinely want to do this work, then I am there. And I do a lot in person. Like, obviously, you see from my Instagram, I do a lot of
Yeah.
traveling. I also do a lot on Zoom, right? And I do a lot just like this, with the last 5 years that we've had, there's a lot of transitioning to it doesn't always have to be in person.
Yeah.
And I always take time off in July.
Oh, good for you.
And that's my
See,
rule.
this whole conversation is about sexual abuse, but I'm learning so much from you that is like career and balance, and I love when that
There you
happens.
go. There you go.
Yeah.
So yes, that is my business.
So, okay, this is all stuff like you're mentioning that people don't want to talk about, and I think it's a little bit different than just regular mental health because mental health it's a lot about ourselves, right? We're struggling if someone's struggling with mental health, it's taboo, you don't want to come across as weak or whatever. But sexual assault, you were saying most of it is happening from people you know. So I can't even imagine what's going on in somebody's, like a parent's mind when that happens. But I want to ask you what it's like for you. You've been dealing with cases that I can't even fathom for a long time. Like, how do you deal with the work every day? Besides taking off July.
Yeah. Yeah, aside from taking
Yeah.
off time to play. Well, I think that there's a difference between the time when I was a prosecutor
Hmm.
and dealing with very real, in the moment trauma. And I really learned, like working in the Sex Crimes and Child Abuse Bureau, I think one of the skill sets that I learned is that you cannot live in someone else's trauma. You have to be able to compartmentalize enough that when you go home. So when I was at the DA's office, I never took a case file home, even if I was on trial. I never brought my work physically home, right? And I can identify out of the probably thousands of cases that I prosecuted over my time there, and I don't have an exact
Yeah.
number, I really worked with these amazing colleagues. We're all in the trenches together. You learn how to rely on each other, and you also learn how to bounce things off of each other. And you also learn that you have to compartmentalize. You have to be able to go home. I had a young child when I was at the prosecutor's office. I had to be able to come home and be a
Wow.
parent and be a spouse and be a human being. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. And I have a few cases where I remember walking in from the office and just going straight into the bathroom and taking a shower and not coming out for 45 minutes, right? Because you just kind of have to find a way to compartmentalize and wash the day off of
Yeah.
you. And I still have cases that I think about now from my time as being a prosecutor. The things that you remember are kind of fascinating, and the things that you don't remember are also just as fascinating. And I think in the work that I do now, and when I was doing historical abuse investigations, so let's say the work over the past 8 years, I've also really learned how to hone that skill set to really be able to kind of do a gut check. Am I okay? Right? I am a true believer in therapy.
Yeah.
I believe everybody should be in therapy. I believe that the hardest part of therapy is finding a therapist that fits you at the time that you are existing in. It's not always the same.
Yeah.
I've had some fabulous therapists, right? I also believe that you have to find the thing that allows you to identify, are you in burnout? Are you not in burnout? What do you need in terms of being able to function? I would say that once I started my business, over the past 4 years, I have really prioritized movement in whatever that looks like, right? For me, it's a combination of knowing that almost every day I have to move my body, right? Whether it's weights or whether it's cardio or whether it's a combination of things, I need to do that. Probably also because of how old I am, but I need to do that.
You're funny.
I need to do it for my mental health as much as my physical health, right? So that is something that I've been able to point at and say, this allows me to come to my work fully.
Mm.
And I think that it's not the same for everyone, right? There are people I always hate the advice of exercise and eat well and you'll be great. That is not accurate,
It's not
right?
one
That is
size
that
fits
is
all.
not
Yeah.
no, it's not one size fits all. And I think that for me, what I've seen is over the years, I've had to really do a taking stock, like a cheshbon, really being able to check, what do I need? Do I need to step back?
Yeah.
Do I need to pause? Can I move forward? And I am a firm believer that when work is over, work is over.
Did you always have that ability to compartmentalize? Because some people naturally they're good at it. I personally, I'm learning to not compartmentalize as much as I do and learning
Right.
how to integrate. And then some people really need to train themselves. I'm curious what it was like for you.
I'm really good at compartmentalizing work.
Okay.
That doesn't mean I'm great at compartmentalizing other
Yeah,
things,
fair.
right? It's the skill set that I've honed when it comes to my work. I also have and it is truly a privilege, and I want to identify that because it is not the case for many other people, but I truly have the privilege of at this point making my own calendar.
Mhm.
So though I travel a lot, I build my travel schedule around my family schedule, around Jewish
Yeah.
holidays. I am very mindful about what I need in order to fully show up in general. Because I'm Shabbat observant, I don't fly on
Right.
Fridays. There's one or two times where I will need to in the course of many years. And I kind of have found a way to be able to do that. And sometimes it works and sometimes it
Yeah.
doesn't. And sometimes I still have to do a gut check.
Yeah. I love the honesty and transparency. Can I ask you, there's one thing about saying all these things, and then there's another of being a mother yourself and having
Sure.
children. How do you balance saying all these things with motherhood?
I think I'm not sure that I can point to a particular strategy. I think that there are times where it is important to remember that really good abuse prevention is not about keeping your kids from everything that will build the resilience and joy of their childhood. I think that a lot of times people kind of take the approach or make an assumption that because I do what I do, like my kids don't have any fun, right? Or that they're
Oh,
not allowed to
that's so
do
sad.
certain things, right? And I think the approach that I've taken is I believe that there are people who engage in really bad things like everywhere.
Yeah.
I also believe that most people in this world are good, right? And I think that when you think about that and you really kind of think about parenting through that, it's about having the conversations and engaging in the small moments of abuse prevention. And as a parent, really doing the work to ensure that the places that you have your child fly off to or your kids fly off to are doing the best job that they
Yeah.
can to keep those places safe with their policies, with their procedures, with their training, with the way they think about things. I would never send my kids to a camp that says, oh, abuse doesn't happen
Yeah.
here. Right? Like, I would never send my kids to a youth program or to do something where they don't take boundaries with kids really seriously. And at the same time, I would work to find a program that does take it seriously. So I think for me, it's all about the balance and also like having really awkward and tough conversations with my kids. Like they're pros at like knowing that I'm going to
Wow.
do that. And it's okay. And it's
Yeah.
okay. It's okay to feel awkward. Parenting is not about being your child's friend. It's about being a parent and then letting them be able to build that resiliency and go off in the world and figure out who they are as a human. It's not about creating mini-me's. It's not about your child having to live up to who you are or what your ideals are. It's about really being able to understand that there is another human being relying on you
Mm.
and that it is your job to both instill values and also safety and give them the tools to be able to be who they want to be and who they are going to become. And that is always a lot easier said than done. But I think that that is a big piece of what drives how I parent and also do this work.
You touched upon the fact that you see a lot of positivity. And just to quote you from one of your articles, you said, I'm an idealist at heart and I believe in the good the world has to offer. And I want to end off by asking you, like, how? How do you still believe in that after everything you've seen?
I I actually really believe that there are so many good people in this world. And I believe that there are people who want to do good. And I believe that it is the good people in all different aspects of the world that we live in who are the driving force in how we allow or how we stop, I guess is the best way to put it, the people who are not good actors, the people who are not doing good things. It's the good people that stop those bad actors
Mm.
when they know how to. And so I think in my heart, I believe that we can make a difference. I believe that this is something where 100 years from now, we could be in a position where people aren't covering up sexual abuse, where they understand the significance, where they are putting kids first, where it is a guarantee that there is not somebody who's crossing boundaries. And I think that you can't do this work unless you truly believe that that's a possibility.
Wow, it goes back to what you were saying when you were trying to figure out what to do after undergrad, how you wanted to make a difference and you wanted justice and all that stuff. It ties back really well to that. And I think it's really special because I have to admit, I'm not always as positive as you are with that. I don't, when I was studying criminology, I did not have that mindset. I had more of the mindset of there's more bad than good. And so
Right.
I think we need people like you who believe that, are able to do the work and share it with the world. And the reason I brought you onto this podcast, the name is the Trailblazer Pod, is because I think you're really opening a path for, you work a lot with faith-based communities, but really a path where people are okay with having these conversations, or at least willing to listen and hear about it. The way I grew up, that was not something that was talked about. It's still not something that's talked about. And I think it's so crucial. I know people in my life who've experienced certain things. So I want to ask you, though, what being a trailblazer means to you.
Oh boy. I think being a trailblazer is recognizing that doing things can be very scary and very, very hard, and finding a way to do it in a way that feels safe for you. It's not the same for everyone. It doesn't have to be big and splashy. It doesn't have to be something that other people see, but it has to be about moving forward in a way that you know that the value add that you have in this world is a value that no one else can give
Yeah.
in the way that you can give it.
I love that. I haven't had an answer like that yet. So thank you so much.
No
Rahel,
problem.
thank you so much for joining me today. It was such a really
Thank
an
you.
honor to sit here with you. And the reason I didn't ask too much about the like the nitty-gritties of it is because I think your work speaks for itself. I think like if you go onto your Instagram, I didn't want to repeat any of that. So really, thank you so much.